while we're waiting for everybody to take their seat, I'd like to again acknowledge our generous sponsors, which includes Alaska Airlines, the University of Alaska Southeast, Sea Alaska, Hanson Grass, the Nature Conservancy of Alaska, ASRC Energy, Buy Alaska, Coastal Helicopters, Alaska Seaplanes, Hecla Mining Company, Bickford Pacific Group, Foodland, the Downtown Juneau Business Association, Local First Media Group, the Juneau Chamber of Commerce, and the United States Forest Service. Huna Totem, and Alaska version 3. Okay, well, excellent. Looks like everybody's ready to go. So with that, let me welcome you back this morning. I have the pleasure of introducing Garrett Schoenberger. Garrett is a managing partner at Alaska Legacy Partners and has a background in real estate. Garrett has experience with lease and sale transactions as well as real estate acquisitions with a private equity group. Prior to this role, he was the director of acquisitions for Curtis Capital Group based in Bellevue, Washington. Garrett holds a business degree from Arizona State University, where he was also a proud member of the Sun Devil baseball program. Please join me in welcoming Garrett to the stage.
Thank you.
Stand up, please.
Okay, welcome to day 2. Great turnout this year. Thank you to our sponsors, staff, JEDC investors, and all of you for another successful Innovation Summit. We also want to thank a few partners. The Tongass Plan revision process is a hugely important process for our region. We appreciate the collaboration with the U.S. Forest Service to date, including a strong presence right here at the Innovation Summit. And we look forward to working closely over the next several years through the revision process. We are excited about scenario planning. The JEDC board believes that scenario thinking is a tool that will help Juneau and the region. And we are appreciative of our partnership with AKV3 or Alaska version 3, an Anchorage-based nonprofit organization that we are collaborating with towards the scenario planning. I want to add my appreciation to the 6 pitch contestants last night. I salute your courage and tenacity to get up there and pitch your ideas and chase your entrepreneurial dreams. That's awesome to see. And also congrats again to the inductees to the Innovators Hall of Fame, Timothy Collette, Billy Connor, and Christine Resler. That's a big award, and we really enjoy giving it out every year. Scenario planning and kind of thinking about the future of Juneau and the region and the state, there's been a lot in the headlines about, whether it's stagnant population or lack of employment growth. You look around and this crazy, amazing state that we live in and the resources we have, whether it's natural resource development or tourism and kind of how to best manage that. But if you aren't long Alaska, you're crazy. And just think about the world in our country and kind of where we're headed in the advancement of AI and accessibility and being able to be anywhere. I think Alaska is going to have a very strong presence in the near future and definitely in the long term. In taking the time to think about that today and how we want to plan for that and where the opportunities are. I mean, quite honestly, that's what I'm interested most in, as we hear about the Tongass plan and recreation and capacity and visitor flows, the U.S. Coast Guard speaking today. There's a lot of big things on the horizon for the region and the state. And I think all of you being here today probably understand that to a degree, and that's why you're here, is to see what the opportunities are and how we're going to manage this process. But it's a big opportunity. We're a big state, and the people that are here for a reason. They understand the beauty and the opportunity. And so I'm pumped on that, and I think you guys should be too. We are looking forward to an engaging day. Let's really try to roll up our sleeves and think about charting the course for the future that we want, and that's really the theme here. It's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. Dr. Peter Newman is the Susie and Alan Martin Professor and the head of the Department of Recreation, Parks, and Tourism Management at Penn State University, and a recognized expert in visitor management and visitor capacity of parks and related areas. He co-leads the Protected Area Research Collaborative, training master's and PhD students to inform visitor management projects related to soundscapes, visitor flow, and integrated visitor use in transportation and connections between outdoor recreation and human health and well-being. Funded by NSF and the National Park Service, he employs mixed method techniques and interdisciplinary research with an approach that combines field research and controlled lab experiments. He currently has 2 studies taking place right here in Alaska, one in the Denali National Park and the other in Wrangell St. Elias, as well as multiple other studies in the lower 48 national parks, including Acadia, Great Smokeys, Grand Teton, and Yellowstone. I sit here and read this bio and I'm thinking, this is like the coolest job ever, the coolest profession, going to all the most beautiful places in our country and doing these studies. Dr. Newman has published nearly 120 peer-reviewed papers, co-authored 3 books, and has been the recipient of several awards. Prior to joining academics, he also served as a National Park Service ranger, environmental educator, and researcher in Yosemite National Park. He is passionate about the outdoors, loves skiing with his family, and is a national ski patroller, marathoner, and triathlete. Again, the most interesting man in the world. This summer, Peter will begin his new role as the Dean of Rubenstein School of the Environmental and Natural Resources at the University of Vermont. Let's give a round of applause for Dr. Peter Newman.
Thank you. Well, that's fun. Good morning. I've never been called an interesting person at 8:30 in the morning, ever. It has been so great to be here. I so appreciate being here. You mentioned all these beautiful places. Add Juneau to that. This is my first time really spending time here, and I haven't really spent time here. So it's just a few days. Everything I've seen has just been incredible. One thing, that I think is been so great about spending time this week is really listening to all the different things that are happening here. And I don't feel like this is happening in a lot of places. And that is the combination of really thinking about the outdoor recreation economy and how that necessitates combining private business with city planning, with public lands planning. That's the key. And you're doing it. I don't know where else that's actually happening, where people are really beginning to think about all these things. And when that happens, obviously there's going to be some tensions and some challenges. And it's not unlike the challenges that we face and work with in capacity in national parks. And, I'm going to give some examples that aren't exactly what's happening here, but what I'm hoping is, as we talk through a case study or two, you'll see some things and glean some things from it and say, oh yeah, here's what we can learn from this and apply it in a different way and think about it in this big systems approach. So that's my hope. And to me, what it comes down to, it's hard to read on the sign here, but this is on the way to Denali. There's a great pullout, and I always stop there, and it says, unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. That's a part of the National Park Service Organic Act. And when you think about that statement, it's really powerful in recreation. It's this concept that we want people to go to these places and enjoy them, like we talked about in so many of these places, in so many of these talks, the connections between outdoor recreation and health, the connections with your own life, all of these things. So we want people to use these places. At the same time, as we use them, there's going to be impacts. And so that balance is exactly what we're talking about. It's what we're talking about whether we're in a tourism scenario, thinking about, the point at which all the people that come for tourism experiences actually begin to damage the very thing that they're looking for in those spaces. So these are the concepts we're talking about. As I mentioned, I got my start in the National Park Service as a ranger in Yosemite. Best job I ever had. Walking with a shovel, talking with people, trying to fix things. It was amazing. And one thing you learn as you work in public lands or in this field is that other people love these places as much as you do. And so the National Park Service is seeing over 330 million people a year visiting units across the country. And most of those are really concentrated in just a few units, really. And so there's a lot of use in these places, and these are places that are very sensitive, obviously, and they're special places. And we like to think about what are the values, the essential characteristics of each of those places, and how do we protect them, because as use increases, impacts increase, right? You can see this is a campsite in Lyle Canyon that I worked on for years as a ranger, and the use proliferates. It could be in a campsite. Has anyone climbed Half Dome? The cable route? Oh, Barb, yes, you have. The Half Dome cable route, it gets crowded. We helped work to create their permit system to understand the numbers and relationship between the flow of people and the numbers of people. And you ask yourself, is this the experience that you want someone to have on Half Dome? And what goes into the trade-offs among thinking about a permit system and creating an experience that people really want, that we're proud of for a place like Yosemite? And amazingly, Frederick Law Olmsted, who was one of the architects of national parks and of Central Park, he said, before many years, if proper facilities are offered, hundreds will become thousands, and in a century, the whole number will be counted by millions. An injury so slight that will be unheeded by any visitor will now be multiplied by millions. Think about how he predicted the future, right? That was 1865. Thinking about the fact that these places are going to become popular, and this will be our challenge. And that's been job security for me. This is our lab. We call it the Protect Areas Research Collaborative, and it started by really thinking about issues of crowding in parks and helping parks do this. And over the last 20 years, oh my gosh, 20 years, we've really grown to really look at a lot of things. Visitor capacity is absolutely one of them. Acoustic science, and I'm going to talk about that. Thinking about noise propagation. Dark skies. We're now working with the National Park Service on the whole Dark Skies initiative and looking at how to replace lights and put in amber lights in national parks. Integrated visitor use and transportation, education and messaging, coupled human-natural systems. This is all part of the different lab that we've built, and we are then generating students, this is my favorite part, that go back to the Park Service or back to universities to keep doing this stuff. And so it's one of the, I think, coolest things about being a part of a university community like that. And what I'm gonna just put on the professor hat for just a second and just go back to capacity. Capacity started with this concept from wildlife biology, the maximum number of species a habitat can sustain indefinitely. It came from Sumner, actually, who did some work in Yosemite, looking at the effects of pack stock on the meadows there. And what's interesting is Sumner, about 10 years later, wrote this: how large a crowd can be turned loose in a wilderness without destroying its essential qualities? That, to me, is a really important question. That was in 1941, when it began to say, wait, capacity isn't just about wildlife, it's also about people, it's about experiences. This was about 20 years later. J.A. Wagar, who had connections to Colorado State University, said how much and what types of visitor use can be sustained in an area before the very experience people are seeking are unacceptably degraded. And he was talking about parks, but this is a question that I think is very much connected to things in tourism and to issues that we've talked about this week, right? How many and what type of visitor experience can be sustained before experience that people are seeking are degraded? That is one of the essential questions there. All right, so then this is because it's 8:30 and I sometimes do this for lectures. I'm just gonna step back for 1 second and talk about recreation experiences, but I have been reminded of this. A professor is someone who talks and someone else is asleep, so I'll just do this really quickly. All right, so the recreation opportunity demand hierarchy is this really, it's a framework used in recreation. I don't think it's really a theory. I would call it a framework, but it underlies the recreation opportunity spectrum that we'll be talking about later. Someone else, not me, but it's on the agenda. And it's the concept that there are activities that take place, and these activities take place in certain settings, and people do that because of certain motivations to accrue benefits. Right? People do things for those benefits. Yesterday, we saw Alex light up when you were talking about trail running and skiing. And I really feel like, you were talking about and feeling those benefits. You were thinking, this is why I do this, right? That's the benefit. And if you think about yourself, you might do a certain activity. It takes place in a certain setting. It could be urban. It could be primitive in wilderness. You do it to fulfill a motivation, to accrue a benefit. When we think about it that way, it really gets us to think about that question that we talked about. Who do we want to be? What are the essential qualities? And that is basically what this concept of benefits-based management is, that we manage these places to accrue certain benefits. And those benefits can be societal, they can be health, we talked about that, that's been brought up. It can be personal, it can be family. There are all these things that we want to manage for. And I think when we focus on what we're managing for, not just on the issues, we tend to make better headway. So I'm just gonna move on. Now I'm gonna go back to my other stuff here. So this, to me, is the relationship we're talking about, this connection between use and impact. And it generally says that as use goes up, impact goes up. But the curve usually looks something like this, which means that most of the impact takes place with a little amount of use. And so we need to focus on thinking how to work on the graph more in the steeper section, because once it's flattened, there's not a lot of work we can do, right? So we're trying to manage it actually when there is some amounts of lower use. But it's not just about use. It's about how we manage that use. So capacity isn't always the answer. It's just an answer, right? And so there are design things, there's behavioral things, and that's what I'm going to try to show in a little bit. And it can be complex. So when we think about our research, we really break it down into two areas. One is descriptive, and the other is evaluative. The descriptive is literally counting things. We send people in the field to count things and to measure relationships. It's numbers, it's modeling. The evaluative is a lot messier. That's the social science stuff. That's the kind of how much change is acceptable. That's the how crowded do you feel? And we all have different ideas of what crowding is. Someone from Alaska might have a different idea of crowding than someone from New Jersey, right? And I'm saying that because I grew up in New Jersey, so, but that's another story. So, it's complex, but we always start with this, management objectives. Think about what is the objective, because capacity should always start with this question. You say, well, what are we managing for, right? So it's a narrative statement. Those narrative statements should include those values, right? What is the gist of what you're looking for? Define the type of visitor experience to be provided and the ecological condition desired, right? It starts with those desired conditions. It then goes to these management objectives. Here's what we're talking about in this space. Then we go to indicators. There's been a lot of talk about indicators, but I want to also give a quick primer on indicators here. So I like to think about indicators like human health. If we think about indicators, they're measurable, manageable variables, and the key part here is manageable, means they're sensitive to change. They reflect the essence or meaning of your management objectives. So the indicators represent the management objectives. When we think of an objective, think about we want to maintain human health. An indicator of human health is body temperature. Would we all agree, right? When you're sick, thermometer goes in the mouth, and what is the standard you're looking for? 98.6, right? And so when you were little, it was kind of like, oh, if I hit 100, I'm staying home from school. Some people like, mom's like, no, it's 101 for you. It depends on the family, but there's a standard in there, right? So you've got your 98.6 is your standard, 100 you're not feeling so good. You take a management action, right? What is the management action? It's rest, it's fluids, it's medication. And then you monitor. You pop that thermometer in again. Am I feeling better? Is the temperature going down? It's working. All right, more of that. If it's not working, you go to the doctor, you try something else. Maybe it's antibiotics. That process that we all do on a regular basis, that's adaptive management. That is the essence of adaptive management. That is what we do all the time, and it doesn't stop. And so this is kind of what it looks like. You have your PARC mission or statement. You develop your indicators that represent that. You develop your standards. This is where the research comes in. You're informing that with research. You're informing it with policy. You're informing it with your budgets, right? And then you monitor. Again, research helps you with monitoring because you're trying to understand, are you measuring what you think you're measuring? That's validity. And so we're really thinking about that in science, and then you go back to your objectives. Are we there? It's a never-ending learning circle. And it's something that I love about what we do, is that we're constantly learning, we're constantly experimenting, we're constantly trying new things. All right, we've been doing this in parks across the US now, really trying to help them out with these things. And what I wanted to do was do a quick little case study on sounds, because this is also something that's come up a lot. I keep seeing it as people talk about, oh yeah, it's too loud. It's really bothering me. It's the aircraft, it's the cars, it's the people. I will tell you, it's all of those things is what we're finding in parks. And opportunities for sounds and quiet is one of the main reasons people go to parks. And we're finding this more and more, which is really, I think, super interesting. We also know that acoustics and sounds affect human health. And we're doing more and more work on the physiological response to loudness, looking at stress and cortisol and heart rate variability and sleep, all these important things. So National Park Service treats sound like they do water or air. It's protected. And we are getting inundated with different sources of noise. This is a 24-hour snapshot of all flights coming in and out of the US. And it's amazing to think about. Look for those empty spaces on the map. You can see the East Coast is waking up. They're getting those early flights from Europe, and then it just goes across the country every single day. Aside from that Southwest area, which I'm pretty sure is where the aliens are. There's an opening there. You're not allowed to fly over that spot. Other than that, there's very few blank spots on the map. And when we measure these things, this is this is spectrogram. This is something we work with our students in our lab, which is where you can record sounds and then you basically, you graph the sounds by frequency and intensity, loudness of the sounds. The top one is Grand Teton National Park with visitors, and the bottom one is the government shutdown. Look at the difference. You can really begin to see the amount of noise created from traffic, from people, and so you begin to understand what masking is. This concept that as more sound increases, you mask the opportunity to hear those nature sounds that everyone really wants to hear. And we think it's bad for people. We also can think about it for wildlife, right? This is a fox in Yellowstone, and it's listening for its prey underneath the snow. And when you think about the importance of sound, it's amazing. I mean, think about the fact that you shut your eyes, but you don't shut your ears. You're constantly listening. Think about the importance of sound. It's literally just, molecules banging, vibrating together, hitting an eardrum, moving a few bones that hits some nerves. It triggers your brain. And then all of a sudden, you're interpreting, what is that sound? Is it trying to get me? Am I trying to get it? Am I safe, right? Those are all things. We're all wild animals in that way, and we're constantly doing that. It's why sound is so utterly important in terms of how things might scare you. even sound related to memory. You think about songs and how closely linked they are to situations. Sound is wired to us in so many primal ways. It's amazing. And so that's one of the reasons that I think it's important for visitors. It's one of the things we think about with sound. I mean, how many people here will go to sleep listening to sounds on an iPhone or whatever you're using, right? I mean, it's so popular, and it's a big part of that calming. And so we've been looking at this across a lot of different measures, looking at anthropogenic noise and the effects on affect, emotion, mood, all of these things. Muir Woods National Monument is a place that we had been working for years, and we've been doing some studies on crowding. And what we found was that there was more and more comments coming up saying, this place is crowded, but I'll tell you the issue is it's loud, and we don't want it loud. It's a redwood forest, right? We want it to be quiet. And so it's also the place where the United Nations, the concept of the United Nations was created in 1945. It's written into the mission that is a primeval and quiet place. And so that became something that we began to study. It's not far from San Francisco, and we were starting to think about how would we measure that. And what we did is we created these surveys that I was thinking, is this even science, what we're doing? But we had people sit and listen and mark sounds they heard and how they felt about those sounds. That was it. But what it ended up doing was, one is we kept seeing words like soothing and peaceful, these very emotive, meaningful words that would come up. But when we plotted everything, you could see that this is the percent of people that heard certain sounds, and then this is pleasing to annoying. Like the -4 would be annoying, and +4 is very pleasing. You can see on the top, 100% of the people heard other people and found it annoying, which is funny. And then loud children definitely were in there too. But these are all manageable things, right? These are things that if we manage correctly, we could reduce that talking. So this is why I'm gonna show you how we thought about this. So the park mission was here, and it was to try to keep things quiet and peaceful. Serenity was part of that. The indicator was percent time human noise was audible, and then we had to measure that sound. And what we ended up doing, let's see. Oh, you guys are so good. You figured out how to do the sound. We played sounds for people. That's Muir Woods. And you can imagine it, the clip over here is kind of the idea that there was no people in the first clip, and let's just go to clip 5. It climbs, and then there's lots of people. Uh-oh, there we go. That's the same level of nature sounds, masked by other visitors, right? And so there's a point at which those sounds become unacceptable. And in this case, it was about 37 decibels. We now use other methods to do this, more like regression rather than this way, but I think this is just a really clear way to think about it. So we could then pull out visitor-caused noise was the indicator. Visitor-caused noise, no greater than 37 decibels 90% of the time. So now we have a mission, we have an indicator, we have a standard, and now we need to monitor. So how do you monitor sounds? You put microphones in the woods. And what we decided to do was try a few different experiments. And we did an experimental design, and we tried different management actions, and we thought about the concept of a library. And we said, all right, well, in libraries, what happens? If you go to the quiet zone and you make sound, has anyone that ever happened to someone? What happens? You get shushed, right? It's this, right? Yeah, right. That's called a sanction. There's actually a social science term for that. You've been sanctioned. So you get sanctioned, and this happens. And so we said, well, let's treat it like a library and see what happens. So we had days when there were no signs. We had days when there were signs. As you're going in, we're saying, please be quiet. You're coming into a quiet zone. You're in a quiet zone. And we put microphones all through the woods. A few visitors did see them and come up to us and say, we know you're listening to us. I'm like, no, we're just measuring loudness. Mm-hmm. They really were convinced we were trying to get conversations, but we weren't. Here's what was cool, is that in an experimental design, we were able to decrease the amount of noise in Muir Woods by 3 decibels, which is the difference between an earthquake that's a 4 and a 7, right? It's a big difference. It was the equivalent of removing 1,150 people from the park without removing 1,150 people from the park. This is something to remember with capacity. Capacity isn't all about a number. That's why I keep saying that, because it's about behavior as well. It's about the behavior of people. And if we can change that behavior, we can think about different adjustments in capacity. So if you've been in your woods, there's now a quiet zone, you'll go there. But we waited about 10, we liked this stuff. 10 years later, we were thinking about this. We said, oh man, and I don't know if any other faculty in the room, this is happening. You're like, darn it, I wish I had done X. And in that case, it was, we wish we'd worked with wildlife biologists to look at were there simultaneous changes in wildlife when we quiet the forest with people. Oh, so we went back and did it. Applied to National Science Foundation. They're like, oh, that's a cool idea. Why don't you go back and do it? We replicated the whole survey, doing the same thing. We put out the microphones. We set up control days and treatment days. We worked with our colleagues in wildlife who then did netting and listening for birds. And I'm going to just go to what we found. On days where there was a treatment in effect, when we were quieting people, birds sang earlier. On days when there was a control day where nothing was in effect and people were louder, birds waited them out. They just waited. They're like, we're not going to compete with that mess. We're going to sing in the afternoon. And it was amazing to see. And so this is something true also in wildlife, is that it's called the Lombard effect. I think it's this concept of not wanting to use a lot of your energy in order to compete with something else to improve your signal-to-noise ratio. Right? And so it's amazing to see. So we had this whole connection between people understanding that it sounded different. They were there to hear wildlife, but on days when it was louder, they couldn't, and they could detect that. And so it really got us thinking about the importance of coupled human-natural systems. The management signs changed visitor behavior, which was amazing. Increased sound levels reduced the human ability to interact with birds and wildlife. And visitor behavior affects wildlife behavior, which in turn affects the visitor experience. So it was a complete circle. And all these things we think are really important. Someone was talking about health yesterday. It's come up a few times. We are finding more and more, and with scientific evidence, that it's not just a thing, it's real. That there are physiological changes when we are exposed to a lot of chronic noise. We also see things differently. What you hear affects aesthetics, what you see. People will actually rate landscapes 30% lower when there's anthropogenic noise, right? So what you see is affected by what you hear. We are right now going through data where we use different anthropogenic noise and nature sounds to understand the effect of on restorative health. And that nature sounds do in fact play a role in how we restore ourselves, both cognitively and with different stress cortisol measures. We've found that in COVID, people talked about, someone yesterday was talking about the fact that there was a big bump in use in outdoor recreation after COVID. We did a nationwide study on this, and that is true. It was a 20% increase overall. People were going out. Here's the kicker, though. The kicker was that our sample showed that there was a 20% increase in new outdoor recreationists for folks saying, yeah, I want to get out because this feels good. The majority of those new outdoor recreationists identified as white, had high levels of socioeconomic indicators, and it really showed that yes, it's true that a lot more people went out, and there's a huge disparity that in that group. And so it is important to remember that these increases aren't equal across, and that's big work to do for all of us, to really think about how do we get to all sectors of the population. This was something that it got a lot of press. It was like in the USA Today, and the Guardian picked it up because it really showed this disparity, and it's something that we really do need to think about. This was an interesting one. Perceptions of crowding changed based on whether people had masks or not during COVID, right? So we actually showed photos randomized to people, and in some they had masks, and in some they did not. People rated areas as feeling more crowded. Again, I'm saying this because crowding isn't just a thing directly connected to the number of people. There's all these other factors that go into it. All right, so with all that said, what have we learned? So one is recreation planning and capacity is a process and not always a product. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be a limit, because there probably are going to be limits, but we need to understand the relationship between those numbers and the very characteristics you're trying to protect. That's a really important thing, and that's where science can come in, and that's where researchers can help. Care and capacity analysis and recreation more broadly should include the consideration and linkages among activity settings, experiences, and benefits. And that's work I think that we're doing later. And I know the Forest Service is really saying to really think about how do we connect all of these different things. It's really important to provide a diversity of recreation opportunities to meet the diverse demands of the public, that we shouldn't be managing all things for all people. We can look at neighborhoods, we can look at locations and develop different indicators across a space to think about diversity. There's a range of recreation management strategies and tactics that can be used to help ensure that thresholds of quality or standards of quality are maintained and that care and capacity is not exceeded. So when we think about indicators and we think about those thresholds, really understanding the monitoring, and this was mentioned yesterday, that monitoring is such a big part of this, and that's also something that research can inform. Analysis and management of care and capacity is marked by internal consistency derived from relationships between desired conditions, indicators, and thresholds of quality, and monitoring and management. And finally, care and capacity, when used as a process with accountable management actions, is rational, it's traceable, it's defensible, because it's really got science connected to all these different things. And finally, what I want to say is, if we think about all the parts and things that we're working on here, we're looking at, what is the future of really protecting the local community and saying, why do I love it here so much? You're connecting that to a larger tourism plan, saying, how does that connect with these large businesses and bringing in the people who are attracted to coming here for the same reasons you probably love being here, and then mixed with this concept of this amazing opportunity on public land. All these three things, all brewing together, is daunting, and at the same time, it's what an opportunity you have to really set the example for how to do this and to really think about the importance of creating that outdoor recreation economy and creating these opportunities while protecting these incredible places. I think that's all I got. 9:20. So thank you. Do you want that up or no? I'll just go to that and let you, if you want that hit.
Okay, thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Oh, wait, questions?
Questions?
I'm super curious about the any cross-pollination you've had since you've looked at birds and whether they sing, as to, for us it's a level of annoyance, for animals, does it actually affect their reproduction or anything like that? And is that next step you're going to, or have you collaborated with folks like that?
So looking at how these numbers affect like fitness of wildlife, is that basically? So yes, so I work really closely with a guy named Jesse Barber, he's a professor at Boise State University. He's a phenomenal scientist. He does bioacoustics, and this is exactly what he's looking at. And actually we're looking at this not only with sound, but we're beginning to look at this with light. Anthropogenic light, and we actually, if you go to Grand Teton, we've changed out light bulbs in some large parking lots in Coulter Bay, and we're beginning to look at the effect of how light affects fitness, right? And what they're finding is kind of amazing, that these parking lots with large white lights are pulling in insects like a vacuum. And they're not rebounding that fast. So it's actually potentially changing the diversity of birds locally the next day, right? And so really thinking about how light is affecting these places is another thing to think about. And I mean, that's obviously a big thing here as well. So that is a thing. And so with sound, yes, we are finding these shifts. Hey, Dan.
Thank you, Dr. Newman. Yeah. I appreciate the framework of thinking through having a vision and then having ways to measure it. And here in Juneau, we've been really focused on numbers. So it was really interesting to hear your discussion of thinking more diversely than that. The place where I think we fall down here on the public land side can be monitoring. That's the part that people don't have the money or the capacity for. And I'm curious if you can talk about how the National Park Service makes sure that final component's in there.
Yeah. Monitoring's hard, And I feel like this is something, it takes investment for sure. And I think that's really challenging, right? With how budgets have gone. What the Park Service does is they do create a suite of indicators that are connected to those management objectives. They try to make them sensitive. They try to make them something related to, use related, manageable, all of these different things. I think part of it, and this has been that, like the CESU, the Cooperative Ecosystem Studies Unit, which is the National Park Service is a part of, has been reaching out to universities to help in designing the science behind monitoring. Because monitoring really is a version of an experiment. You're really trying to come up with good methodology to increase validity of what you think you're measuring, and then connecting what you're measuring to that change. Is it sensitive in change? Is it telling us what we think it is? I don't think I've answered your question. What do? They work within each of the different divisions, has indicators that they are, in a sense, in charge of, right? So wilderness has a set of indicators they work with. There's a visitor use group. They all have these different indicators, and I think they divide it by division, is my sense of how they do that. Is that kind of what your question is, Dan? There are other ways of doing this, right? Like there's citizen science is a way of doing monitoring eventually. And a lot of it is really about trying to come up with good, valid techniques to measure things. I mean, in a nutshell.
Great, thanks, Dr. Newman. That was a really thoughtful presentation, and you touched on it a little bit, mainly naming the difficulty of accessibility, and especially as we start to reach these capacities and maintain a quality of the experience. How do you also try to maintain, and maybe I know you touched on it, but just some big takeaways of keeping it accessible and not limiting folks that are maybe not affluent or something like that?
Yeah. Man, I wish I had that answer. I mean, that's a tough one, and I think part of what I keep thinking about is partnerships. Is really thinking about how do we partner. I would think it's maybe more difficult up here because you're getting the people already coming up here, and there's different. I don't know. I kind of think there's times when I think that the National Park Service and Forest Service could be working with local communities in their local parks as well. And messaging things, like really thinking a little more systemically and across the landscape on that. And working with partners, Leave No Trace, Center for Outdoor Ethics, they've been pretty good about getting, concepts of how to, they're actually really working on diversifying their audiences that are pulling people in and really thinking about there is a diversity of recreation opportunity. It's not all Alaska, and that opportunity is amazing. And, I was amazed I moved from Colorado to Pennsylvania, and I'm thinking, oh man, how's this gonna be? Recreation in central Pennsylvania was amazing. Like I had no idea that we even have this tiny little ski area, I mean, it's so accessible, right? And so, I don't know, I kind of feel like we need to think more broadly about access to outdoor recreation beyond the big things as well. But I don't have an answer for that. And I think the Park Service and the Forest Service and a lot of public agencies are really trying to figure that out. And it's about communication, and it's about connecting with groups at home, I think. Barb.
Can't let you go without asking a question, and it's really nice to see a former Yosemite Ranger in such a great career. I knew him back in the day.
In the 90s.
You mentioned in your presentation a little bit about, capacity is not solely about numbers. There's design components that can be thought of as well. Can you provide some examples from your work across the country that get to that design? That would be helpful. Thank you.
Yep. So an example is stuff we did in Rocky Mountain National Park, where their Bear Lake corridor is actually not unlike the Mendenhall. I drove up there yesterday, and it's one road up and back, right? So Bear Lake corridor is a similar kind of thing in Rocky, and their capacity was set on the size of the parking lots there. And what ended up happening was the parking lots basically would fill up and people would go somewhere else. So capacity never really went up beyond the number of spots in the parking lot. And then they ended up doing something that was really cool. They put in a shuttle system. They used the local high school buses that weren't being used in the summer. They began shuttling people up to Rocky. But from a capacity standpoint, that doubled the use in that area. And so all of a sudden you had these high capacity roads and ways to low capacity places, and they started seeing impact. So we went in there years later and we created some models that showed how to develop a shuttle system that would go from town and could accommodate the same number of people, but it would deliver what we were calling the right number of people to the right place at the right time, right? Time and space are huge parts of capacity when you think about it. Think about time and space. You can disperse people to other places. You can disperse people through time. Use is often crowded. It spikes, it goes up, and it leaves a lot on the table for dispersing people. If you spread those people through time a little more evenly, it actually could be less crowded, right? Because crowding is a function of space and time, right? It's the number of people in a place at a time. And so the design there was designing the size of the shuttle, the speed of the shuttle, where the pickups were, knowing and having live information about how many people were in different places, and diverting routes when it got crowded to other substitutable places. So figuring out where else might someone want to go in the meantime. Maybe not everyone needs to go at noon up to the glacier. This could be something that a city can get involved in and say, wouldn't it be cool if people knew when they were going to go up to a certain place, but they knew that in the meantime, grab breakfast in town, go to these shops, do your shopping here. This is what happened in Rocky. Estes Park worked together with the park to think about that system. And they developed a system that delivered people in a fairly regular way. And it was about bus size, bus speed, bus location, and routes. And so that's a design concept. Yosemite, the one way, right? Remember, it used to be two ways when we were first there, and then they went to a one-way traffic model, because they knew that if that happens, that would actually spread people out in a different and somewhat predictable way. So we developed regressions between the front gate and Yosemite Falls. And we would know 45 minutes before we hit crowding standards, we would know that was happening from the regression because of the flow of people. And so before it happened, they would divert people then to Glacier Point. And they would say, hey, we're headed toward that number. We suggest you go to Glacier Point first. It's going to be a lot less crowded. And people say, thank you. That's fantastic. Thank you for telling me. And they would go and have a better experience up there and then go to Yosemite Falls. And so those are all design ideas that have worked. Thanks, Barb. Yeah.